Happy Tuesday. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's #2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Today's episode is quite a big episode. We have some very serious developments to cover. First up, yesterday, Monday, the supreme decision-making body in the People's Republic of China, the Politburo, met to, quote, analyze and research 2025 economic work, study and deploy party conduct, clean governance, and anti-corruption work. End quote. There was no announcement of the Central Economic Work Conference, but this Politburo meeting usually signals the conference will convene in the next couple of days. The meeting made some very strong signals that the economy is in very bad shape and that big support measures are coming. The 24-man Politburo, led by Xi Jinping himself, announced that China will shift its monetary policy stance from, quote, prudent, end quote, to, quote, moderately loose, end quote, for the first time in 14 years, with the last time being in response to the 2008 global financial crisis, signaling a significant response to mounting economic challenges. Indeed, some analysts have gone as far as calling it desperation, a move unthinkable even a few months ago due to the already massive surge of debt in the last few years, which the party has been trying to get under control. The Politburo emphasized the need for, quote, more active fiscal policies and moderately loose monetary policies, end quote, underscoring a commitment to counter deflationary pressures. According to a note from Huatai Securities, this is the first time since 2001 that China's authorities have characterized their overarching strategy for fiscal policy as more active. As we discussed in yesterday's video, China faces the nightmare scenario of falling into a deflationary spiral. CPI inflation was up a very disappointing 0.2% year-on-year versus a 0.3% rise in October and well below expectations of a 0.5% rise. We covered this in detail in yesterday's video. Evidently, Beijing is more terrified of falling into a deflation trap than the likely further surging of debt resulting from loosening the money taps. Peking University Professor of Finance Michael Pettis observed on the inflation data yesterday, quote, we couldn't have asked for much worse inflation data for November. In the 3 months from August to November, CPI prices in China have declined at an annualized rate of just over 3.5%, end quote. Then, in another statement, quote, producers are unable to make money. A Chinese friend of mine who owns several factories told me last month that the only way he can make a profit is by selling into Europe. Every sale in China is done at a loss, he said, and is done just to keep production going. End quote. The policy pivot announced by the Politburo yesterday recalls the so-called moderately loose approach adopted during the 2008 global financial crisis, which ended in 2010. Analysts from Brown Brothers Harriman noted that robust fiscal measures are crucial to break free from China's current debt deflation cycle. Morgan Stanley economists highlighted the unprecedented inclusion of the terms more and extraordinary in policy descriptions, suggesting a stronger commitment to unconventional measures. Top officials on Monday also made direct pledges to, quote, stabilize property and stock markets, end quote. And this in particular has caused the market to react with a level of positivity. China's 10-year bond yields fell to a record low of 1.92%, reflecting a surge in bond prices. The Hang Seng China Enterprises Index in Hong Kong closed 3.14% higher, indicating investor optimism that policymakers are taking the economic stimulus more seriously, though of course this is all coming from a very low base. While the tone of the policy is promising, analysts remain cautious about the speed and effectiveness of implementation, especially since support over the last several months has been very underwhelming. At the risk of overquoting the man, Pettis today made several thoughtful observations on this signalled change in the monetary policy too, which I think are worth touching on here. In response to the Politburo's announcement that China will shift its monetary policy stance from prudent to moderately loose, Pettis expressed, quote, there may be a lot of excitement about this seeming change in policy, but given how the People's Bank of China policy has accommodated one of the fastest debt increases in history, unlike the People's Bank of China, I would not be describing Chinese monetary policy over the last 10 to 15 years as prudent. What China needs is not more accommodating monetary policy, but rather a major shift either in fiscal policy or in the domestic distribution of income. China's problem is not monetary, it is fiscal. The good news is that Chinese economists increasingly recognize the problem, and so I suspect it is just a question of time before policymakers do too. The bad news is that there still seems to be little discussion of what a shift in income distribution entails and why it will be so difficult. End quote. But how can policymakers recognize the nature of China's economic problems and have these discussions if China's economists are increasingly silenced? This brings us to the next story. In recent days, two outspoken Chinese economists, Fu Peng and Gao Shanwen, have found themselves at the center of controversy after making critical remarks about China's economic prospects. Known for their candid assessments, both have recently faced social media suspensions following their statements, sparking debates about the state of the country's economy. Fu Peng, the chief economist at Northeast Securities, has remained unusually quiet after his late November speech, where he challenged the official narrative of a robust economic recovery. In his address, Fu warned that China's economic troubles could mirror Japan's decades-long stagnation unless wealth redistribution is prioritized to boost domestic demand. Quote, "If we don't do this, we will end up like Japan over the past 35 years. End quote, Fu remarked, highlighting the urgency of the issue. He also made the very politically incorrect observation that, quote, "Whenever the economy contracts, it's those at the bottom who suffer the most first. However, that barely has any impact on the macroeconomic data." End quote. His comments struck a chord with the public, whose everyday struggles with high unemployment, layoffs, and sluggish demand contrast sharply with the government's optimistic economic reports. Fu's WeChat account, once a popular source of insight, was soon made unavailable. Similarly, Gao Shanwen, chief economist at SDIC Securities, faced repercussions for his remarks about the overstated economic growth figures. In a meeting with investors, Gao claimed that China's GDP has been inflated by as much as 3 percentage points annually over the past few years. We covered this last week. He also noted a troubling disconnect between economic growth and employment, suggesting that official data might not be as reliable as it appears, with perhaps as many as 50 million people unemployed that are not covered in the official data. Gao's speech, which gathered traction online, was swiftly removed, and his WeChat account was also suspended due to, quote, "policy violations," end quote. Such censorship of economic content reflects the extreme sensitivity of expert opinions that repudiate or deviate from the official government narrative on the economy, or that question official economic statistics or overall management of the economy, especially as the country grapples with sluggish recovery. But this is also a very dangerous state of affairs. It's difficult to correct the ship of state when those offering the most accurate diagnosis are too scared to say it. Next up, we have two more developments to cover, but just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit the like button. Liking, sharing, and subscribing is a tremendous help. It is just me making these episodes free and open for all 6 days a week. Keeping the algorithm happy is the only way in which the channel can grow and be shown to new people. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description below for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable. I rely primarily on your support, the subscribers' support, to keep going. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Let's continue, and we move now on to military and geopolitical matters. First up, tensions across the Taiwan Strait. Yesterday, Monday, Taiwan raised its alert level, saying China has reserved airspace and deployed naval and coast guard vessels in what a security source called the first military drills across a broad swath of the region's waters. UK-based Reuters reports that a senior Taiwan security official said China had nearly 90 Navy and Coast Guard ships near Taiwan, the southern Japanese islands, and the East and South China Seas, of which around 2/3 were naval. China has been expected to launch another round of exercises in response to Taiwanese President William Lai Ching-te's trip to the Pacific, which included stopovers in Hawaii and the US territory of Guam. Today, France-based AFP, in a press event with a People's Republic of China Foreign Ministry spokesperson, asked, quote, Taiwan's Ministry of Defense said today it detected Chinese warships and Coast Guard vessels in waters surrounding Taiwan and said that the PLA has restricted the airspace off the Chinese coast. What is China's comment? Is China conducting military drills around Taiwan? End quote. The spokesperson responded, quote, there is no such thing as Taiwan's Ministry of Defense. Taiwan is a part of Chinese territory. End quote. And on this topic, this brings us to our last development to cover. In late November, US-based think tank Brookings hosted a public discussion about security in the Indo-Pacific theater with US Admiral Samuel Paparo, who since this past spring has been America's combatant commander of the Indo-Pacific Command. Before this assignment, Paparo, as commander of the US Pacific Fleet, had the top job in the US Navy within that command, meaning that he now has nearly 5 years of consecutive service in the region. This week, Lin Kwok, Lee Kuan Yew Chair in Southeast Asian Studies, and Michael E. O'Hanton, Director of Research, Foreign Policy, both at Brookings, published a piece unpacking the top 6 takeaways of this conversation with Paparo. We end today's video by quoting selected excerpts from this piece directly. 1. The military balance in the Indo-Pacific remains favorable to the United States and its allies. In recent years, some analysts have warned that China has caught up to the US military for scenarios involving Taiwan in particular. Many US war games predict that China would succeed in defeating the United States, its allies, and Taiwan in a Taiwan contingency. As Christian Bross has explained in his recent book, The Kill Chain, Paparo made clear that China would face difficult odds whether in a D-Day style invasion or a more indirect, coercive approach like a blockade. 2. Conflicts in Europe and the Middle East are placing pressure on US defense preparedness. While the military balance in the Indo-Pacific remains favorable to the United States and its allies, the wars in Europe and the Middle East are putting stresses on this advantage. When asked how these conflicts were affecting defense preparedness in the Indo-Pacific, Paparo said that these conflicts, as of this year, are, quote, eating into stocks, end quote. His concerns included systems for air and missile defense, like the land-based Patriot. When pressed specifically on whether US support for Ukraine was diverting weapons from Taiwan, he highlighted how he had already been, quote, dissatisfied with the magazine depth, end quote, which would be critical in a protracted conflict, and was now, quote, a little more dissatisfied, end quote, with it. 3. Drones can help the United States, but they are no silver bullets, and larger systems are necessary. One popular idea that Paparo challenged is the idea that by emulating Ukraine's or Israel's response on the battlefield, specifically their deployment of drones, the United States can largely solve its military challenges in the Taiwan contingency. He noted that the Pacific is a vast battle space, 8,000 miles east to west, and a comparable distance north to south. DIY, do-it-yourself, or FPV, first-person view drones cannot handle this vast space. Quote, a pocket drone that can stay airborne for an hour ain't going to do it, end quote, for certain scenarios. Paparo was not belittling the importance of drones. He had previously been quoted as arguing that they could contribute to a hellscape environment for any Chinese ships trying to cross the Taiwan Strait to attack Taiwan. Rather, he was underscoring that they are only one aspect of a proper military modernization strategy for the United States in the Indo-Pacific region. 4. The year 2027, which some have raised as the year when China might potentially invade Taiwan, was never a sell-by date for Beijing, and the United States has to be prepared. Several years ago, Xi Jinping gave his military leaders the task of being ready to take Taiwan, even in the face of US military involvement by 2027. Paparo is unpersuaded that year means very much, especially now that it is only 25 months away. However, Indo-Pacific Command must be ready to help defend Taiwan even before 2027, and it should certainly plan on being prepared to defend Taiwan after that year as well. 5. New US access rights in the Philippines are geared towards humanitarian assistance and disaster relief and are currently of limited strategic benefit. And 6. North Korea's long-range missiles or intercontinental ballistic missiles have not yet demonstrated an ability to deliver a nuclear warhead to the United States. The sum total of these 6 observations suggests to us that the United States' strategic posture and defense commitments in the Indo-Pacific remain robust, but maintaining its advantage will require work. On balance, Paparo's assessments are reassuring, but also represent a renewed and urgent call to action and improvement. Okay, here ends the direct quote and today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Tuesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.